The wind swept across the northern Korean plains with a dry metallic bite, carrying the scent of smoke and iron. The fortress of Kuju stood stubborn against the horizon, its walls blackened from relentless bombardment. Inside, the defenders were exhausted, their hands blistered from archery, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. They had survived waves of Mongol assaults, catapults that hurled stones like falling mountains, and fire carts that turned wooden gates into infernos. But no one in Kuju could have predicted what would end the siege in the matter of minutes. Not catapults, not ladders, not even overwhelming numbers. The decisive force came in the form of a single mounted archer, a man trained from childhood to kill with unerring precision. One arrow would shatter the chain of command, spread panic, and unravel weeks of desperate defense. According to historical records preserved in the Goryeo, this moment became a rare instance in the Mongol campaigns of Korea where the skill of one warrior changed the course of an entire siege.
To understand the stakes at Kuju, we must step back into the 1230s, during the Mongol invasions of Korea. By this time, the heirs of Genghis Khan had already carved an empire across northern China, Central Asia, and parts of the Middle East. Goryeo, the kingdom that controlled the Korean peninsula, initially faced Mongol demands for submission, tribute, and military support. But the Goryeo court hesitated. Envoys were delayed, messages misinterpreted, and some Mongol envoys were even killed. Diplomacy failed, and in 1231 the Mongols launched their first invasion under the general Sarsay. The Mongols were masters of mobility, communication, and psychological warfare. Their armies moved like living machines, coordinated across vast distances, striking cities with lightning speed. Most cities fell within hours or days, local militias scattered, panic rippled through the countryside. But Kuju was different. Small in scale but strategically crucial, it guarded an approach route vital for Mongol advancement. The fortress would become a symbol of resistance, and inside its walls, an otherwise unremarkable official named Pakso rose to command its defense. Pakso had no reputation as a general. He was a local administrator, a man of order and organization rather than battlefield fame. But war has a way of elevating ordinary men to extraordinary roles. He transformed Kuju into a self-sufficient fortress, rationed supplies with ruthless efficiency, and rotated defenders tirelessly along the walls.
Sartai, expecting a quick conquest, found himself facing a fortified city that would not yield. Wave after wave of Mongol assaults were repelled. Korean archers darkened the air with arrows, boiling oil scalded attackers who approached the walls, and timber from breached gates was quickly repaired by relentless defenders. Days passed, then weeks. Mongol engineers brought catapults, hurling massive stones at the battlements. Fire carts rolled against the gates, igniting them with oil and kindling, yet the fortress held. Morale within Kuju was a fragile flame, yet still alive. But beneath the walls, the situation grew dire. Supplies were dwindling, especially arrows. Defenders scavenged the field below for Mongol shafts, risking their lives each night. Leadership and coordination became critical, and it was here, in this crucible of desperation, that the stage was set for a single act to determine the siege's outcome.
The Mongols devised a strategy to exploit the fortress's weakness. A specialized team of horse archers, along with siege engineers, would feign attacks and probe the walls for vulnerabilities. Among them was a veteran marksman, described in Korean records as distinguished and unmatched in mounted archery. Though his name is lost, his reputation for deadly precision was well known among the Mongols. On the dawn of the decisive day, thin fog drifted across the plain. The Mongol tents appeared as dark teeth on the earth, and their cavalry silently assembled. Each horse pawed at the ground. Each archer adjusted his bowstring with meticulous care. Then, without warning, they charged. It was not an all-out assault. It was a calculated display of speed and aggression, meant to lure the Korean defenders into using their dwindling arrows. Mongol horsemen swept across the field, losing volleys from both flanks, retreating and surging forward again. The sound of hooves thundered in rhythm with snapping bowstrings, echoing against the fortress walls. Korean archers returned fire, but their quivers emptied quickly. Stones and roof tiles were hurled down, but the Mongols pressed closer. Then, the veteran marksman made his decisive move. Alone, he charged toward the weakest section of the north wall, a section relentlessly pounded by catapults and now dangerously close to collapse. His horse galloped across the plain, hooves kicking up clouds of dust. He aimed at the commander on that wall segment, Kim Kyung-hae, who directed counterattacks and rallied exhausted troops. Pak Seo recognized the danger. He ordered men to take cover, but the arrow was already airborne. It struck Kim Kyung-hae in the throat. He fell instantly, hands clutching the fatal shaft as blood ran down his armor. Shock froze the defenders. Chaos rippled instantly across the parapet. The Mongol marksman did not pause. He nocked a second arrow, this time targeting the signal officer who coordinated defensive communication. Another shot, and the officer was thrown from the wall, leaving the garrison unable to call for reinforcements or organize counterattacks. At that exact moment, Sartai launched the final assault. Infantry surged with ladders and rams. Engineers rushed to breach points, shielded by archers exploiting the confusion. The walls that had resisted weeks of attacks crumbled within minutes. Men fled in panic, others surrendered, and the Mongols planted their standard atop the breached parapet. Pak Seo narrowly avoided a fatal arrow. His men were disoriented, leaderless, and terrified. The fortress, a symbol of stubborn resistance, collapsed almost instantly after weeks of siege. Minutes turned the tide, thanks to the precision and timing of one mounted archer.
The chaos on the walls reached its peak within moments. Mongol infantry streamed through the breach, shields raised, spears thrusting, while archers circled above the parapets, firing at any defender who dared show his head. The cries of men, the clanging of steel, the snapping of bows, and the thunder of hooves merged into a terrifying cacophony. Pak Seo tried to rally the remaining defenders. "Hold your ground. Don't let them reach the inner courtyard," he shouted, voice hoarse from shouting over smoke and shouts. But the death of the commander and the signaler had already shattered the chain of command. Confusion ruled the walls. Some soldiers held their posts, others fled, unsure where to aim, whom to follow. It was in these terrifying minutes that the Mongol archer's brilliance shone. Witnesses described him moving like a shadow, striking targets with unerring accuracy. Every arrow that left his bow sowed panic. Groups of defenders froze, then scattered. Leadership evaporated with each successive shot. Within the space of 10 minutes, the fortress that had held firm for weeks teetered on the brink of collapse. Historians emphasize the psychological impact. Kuju's defenders were seasoned, disciplined men, but the sudden loss of leadership combined with relentless, precise attacks from a highly skilled archer created a moment of total shock. Panic spread faster than any weapon. The fortress's defense, once coordinated and fierce, became a series of isolated, desperate skirmishes. By the time Mongol infantry had fully entered, the walls were virtually undefended. The inner courtyard became a death trap for those who stayed, the streets of Kuju ran red with blood, and smoke from fires engulfed the remaining defenders. Within minutes, the siege had ended. Weeks of planning, fortification, and desperate resistance had been undone by a single, well-timed sequence of actions.
After the battle, Sartai praised his troops for their courage, singling out the mounted archer whose shots had broken the defenders' morale and command structure. While Mongol traditions seldom glorified individuals, referring instead to collective action, the Korean sources specifically mention the archer's deadly skill as decisive. Pak Seo and other surviving defenders were captured. Historical accounts differ on their ultimate fate, but most indicate that Pak Seo was taken alive, interrogated, and eventually incorporated into the Mongol system in some administrative capacity. His steadfast resistance, however, earned him a measure of respect from his conquerors. The fall of Kuju opened a strategic pathway for Mongol forces to penetrate deeper into Goryeo.
It signaled to the Korean court that resistance would require both immense preparation and recognition of Mongol tactical prowess. Subsequent invasions saw greater Mongol coordination, but the psychological lesson remained. One precise action, executed at the right moment, could undo even the strongest defenses. Had the arrow missed its mark, had Kim Kyung-hee survived, or had the signaler remained on the wall, the siege might have dragged on for days longer. Supplies might have lasted, reinforcements could have arrived, and the Mongol forces might have been forced to withdraw due to logistical constraints. The Korean defenders were skilled and determined, and Kuju had nearly withstood the empire's fury. But history records outcomes, not hypotheticals. The outcome that day was stark and absolute. The fortress fell in minutes, demonstrating the devastating efficiency of Mongol tactics and the lethal precision of a single mounted archer.
Looking back, the siege of Kuju is a reminder that battles are not always won by the largest armies, the heaviest weapons, or the thickest walls. Sometimes, a single act, an arrow loosed at precisely the right moment, can change the course of history. The Mongol horse archer's skill, patience, and timing transformed what could have been a protracted and costly siege into a rapid and decisive victory. Surviving defenders, chroniclers, and later historians marveled at the moment when the tide shifted so dramatically. For the Mongols, it reinforced the value of precision, mobility, and psychological mastery. For Koreans, it became a lesson in the vulnerability of even the most prepared defenses to the sudden collapse of leadership and communication. In the end, history remembers the siege not for the walls, the stones, or the weeks of struggle, but for the human element, the individual who seized a fleeting moment and reshaped destiny. The arrow that struck Kim Kyung-hee, the collapse of command, and the panic that followed serve as enduring reminders. In war, as in life, the smallest actions can have the most profound consequences. The legacy of the Mongol horse archer of Kuju endures not in grand monuments, but in the narrative of skill, timing, and human courage that continues to inspire awe across centuries. And so, in mere minutes, a single archer ended a siege, proving that sometimes history itself bends to the hand or the bow of one determined individual.